so perfect, Rahim. Thank you, thank you. So everything that's happened up to this point, that encapsulates what I'm about to talk to you about. It's so perfect. It's about love. It's about refuge. It's about safety. It's about being okay, no matter what. As I was preparing for today and noticed the date, I realized that today is 20 years since the day my mother passed. And the last few years, I kept thinking, we need to do something special for that. Well, our family's kind of scattered to the winds right now, and it just didn't fall into place. And I thought, how perfect, because my mom was a spiritual teacher, and how perfect for me to have a platform on that day. And so as I have learned my way, because I had her on such a pedestal, you would hear me quote her every other statement I made that was spiritual, and I had to learn to just say my understanding. So I avoided doing that for a while. But today, I would love to devote some time to letting you know what her message was. It's everything you've heard so far today is the truth of it. And so magnificent of a person. Now, I was raised as a Catholic from the time I was born until I was 8 years old. So I had a nice, strong foundation that as we know, we tend to spend the rest of our lives overcoming our childhood, no matter what that is. But from the time of 8 years old, my mother was a seeker, and she and my Aunt Helen became spiritual partners. They studied together, and they prayed together, and they worked together. They loved God. And their journey took them into spirituality as opposed to religion. And so their love of God was deep and strong. My first, my little 8-year-old mind, and we had plenty of dysfunction, as we almost all did in our households. My first exposure to metaphysics was all the positive affirmations. And, coinciding that was my, reading fairy tales and stuff. So in my mind, it was like, oh, okay, so we believe this now. And it didn't quite connect. It felt like we were play acting. Like, oh, everything's okay. Didn't feel real to me at that time. But the affirmations were still comforting. The affirmations still gave me a different view of God and gave me an opportunity to paint God in a different light. And so over time, I think when I had my biggest switch is when I was about 19, and I studied it and I did the affirmations and I prayed. There was that part of me, though, that I took it as toxic positivity, in the sense that if I did a prayer to not feel pain and I still felt pain, I thought I was doing it wrong, and I judged myself for that, do you see? So when I was about 19, I was in a pretty severe car accident. I was flat out on my back for 2.5 months. And sometimes you have to be on your back to look up. And so what happened for me was I had double vision, so I couldn't read, which I love to read. TV, after a while, just bored. They put a little TV in my room, bored the heck out of me after a while, which is pretty remarkable, especially if you knew how I'm addicted to Netflix nowadays. But my mind, and so I said, Mom, she had given me power through constructive thinking when I was 12 years old. But I started looking at the book more seriously and started journaling. My mother would read and write and pray and meditate on a daily basis. I've never seen anyone that read as much as she did. I would say about 50% or more of what she read was spiritual, and then anything and everything else that she could get her hands on. But that's when I started journaling, and I started understanding the concepts at a much deeper level, and it became usable to me in a whole new way. And I see that as when I started my spiritual journey for real, where it was not just, as many of us were raised in different religions, and we believed what we were told to believe, and me included, even with metaphysics. So there was that moment when I embraced it and said, okay, this makes sense to me. Once I did that, I could turn around and listen to my mother, who had also evolved through her concepts of how to make this practical. And she used to do these intensives. And for her to become a teacher, first of all, that's a whole other story, because she was more of an introvert, very, very great one-on-one, but she had no desire to stand up in front of people. But it just evolved that way, because that was where her talents were, and she realized she had to get over herself to be able to give, because people were receiving what she had to offer, so she didn't want to deny that. So anyway, she develops this intensive, and in these intensive programs, there'd be about 20 people there. And the reason I'm telling you this story is it fits so perfectly with that song you just sang, is that people would sit down and they would take turns. I mean, she would lay out some foundational beliefs about what she believed about God and the goodness of God, and she created that safe and sacred place. And then that person, say you were the one to go first, she would sit you down. In one version, it was chair to chair. In one version, you're looking in a mirror and she's sitting behind you. Both were very effective. And the rest of the people in the group would hold space and just learn to sit there and listen and to send energy of support and love. And people would do a life review, and it would take about an hour per person. So this was a commitment to everyone there for 3 or 4 days, depending on the number of participants. And she would say, okay, go to 1, do you have any memories? Go to 3, and she would just feel guided where to take them. Just tell me the first thing that comes in your mind. And after a while, you would begin to see these threads, and people would just start crying and talking about things they never talked about in their whole life because they felt that love and support from the group. And at the end, when she would get to where they were currently, you could begin to see, and she would just say, can you see how this all weaves together? And she would see the theme of the life and what their desire was in their journey in seeking love and seeking self-acceptance and seeking this and seeking that. All this to say, there comes a point where you hear enough stories and you realize that so much of the loneliness that we felt and the self-judgment we felt is a universal thing. Where up to that point, I didn't get that. I felt less than everyone else, and I thought y'all had knowledge I would never get, and you would just, you know what I'm saying? It took me sitting there and listening to story after story with such compassion. I mean, there was everybody there. It was all about this safe place and the journey that we all are on, and you could see that no matter how much they misstepped, some of the stories were so similar it was scary, and some were the opposite but with the same motive. And so we began to really see how one we all are, and how okay we all are, and how perfect in our imperfections, how perfect we are, that we're just on this journey. That was so powerful for me and so empowering to see that 9 times out of 10 in high school, nobody thought they were on the in crowd. And that 1 person in 10 that thought they were, they thought they didn't really belong there and they had everybody fooled. You know? So it's such an illusion that they have it and I don't. That is a big, fat illusion. Okay? And then to realize that no matter what persona they had mastered, we all had such similar feelings of doubts and fears and how we managed through things and how we judged ourselves and how we pulled it back together again. And it was just such a learning experience, and I'll never forget that. It has always made me feel so much a part of everyone else that I meet. And you begin to just love whoever's in that chair, and you're sending this love and support, the waves of love that you would feel come out of yourself. It was a wonderful exercise in consciously loving someone through their imperfections to the point that you see how perfect they really are, just as they are. And wow, look at that spirit. Look at that spirit. And they would often be overcoming these big old things, and they're so focused on what they thought was an error that they missed how courageous they were and how maybe they were, tumbling off of something that was not of their creation, that they were reacting to. And so there was so much self-forgiveness and so much forgiveness of self as we lent our compassion to these folks. And we would just grow so close in this time. So I just want to honor the fact that what I believe my mother did was creating such a place of safety and reflecting back the sacredness of this journey, that it's about the journey, and are we continuing to try to learn and grow? And can we just give ourselves credit for showing up? This earth is not for the faint of heart, in case you hadn't noticed. I kind of noticed that, So I think it took us a lot of guts to, however that works, make the decision to be here, but make the decision, if you're in this room, man, you've shown up and said, I'm committed to understanding something right here and right now. And can we forgive that child? Can we forgive that teenager? Can we forgive that 20-something, 30-something, whatever it may be, that parent, that child, for the missteps as we're learning? And if we, again, I love to use the analogy of this being a lab. If we can really understand that we're trying things out. Does this work? No. This works a little better. This hurts less. I can get the same results if I do this, but it doesn't hurt. And that's what we're here about. And if it's okay that we make those errors or whatever the heck you want to call them, that doesn't make you judge yourself. That's the thing. That's the ticket. My mother, as I was, going into my early 20s and making plenty of mistakes, she said to me, I was kind of wondering if she was going to, if this was the talk where she was going to tell me how to straighten my life out. Her words to me rang in my ears, and it was simply, just don't do anything that you're going to judge yourself about. That's your guideline. If you think you're going to walk away feeling ashamed, or you're going to walk away feeling that you need to be hard on yourself about something, maybe you need to rethink that thing. Well, that's a very different guideline than the thou shalt nots, right? It kind of covers all of that, but from such a loving space. So it's about that love and care, and how differently do we grow in the sunshine, right? How differently. So I'm pretty, I feel a lot of emotion. I've had so many signs around her being present with us today, and between the music and the way all of this is coming together, that it's really personally moving me. But I wanted to tell you, my mother also, in addition to her teaching, she was a spiritual intuitive, and she did personal sessions, and she did group sessions, and taught in that regard as well. And I want you to listen to the prayer of attunement that she used, because I think it speaks so much to that desire to lift and to grow, and so much of what her message was about. You will hear similarities in this, because I use some of this often in my centering for meditation, or also opening prayers, because I find it so amazing. So this is what she would say. Let's relax together. That was always the first thing. So it's the breath, the sitting still. And let's feel the presence of the living, loving God. To me, that is the most powerful statement out of the whole prayer, because it's saying, I believe that God is living and loving right here and right now. I'm claiming the sacredness, and I'm claiming my presence in it so I can feel it. And let it heal me. Let it lift me. And the next is, in this moment of time, we ask to lift beyond earth and into areas of absolute truth. So she's saying, as we often do with our meditations, let's leave behind all the stuff, the monkey mind, the noise, all of that is inherent in this statement, to say, let's leave all that behind. And we're saying, I'm going for truth here. I'm not going to listen to the voices that are negating anything wonderful in my life in this moment. And instead, I'm going to center into those things that are true. I'm going to be open to be inspired by new truths that maybe I didn't understand before, or to feel, since I am saying I'm feeling the presence of God, can I feel that truth in this moment? We ask that the things most needed by these souls in this time will be spoken. So it's just saying, we're invoking, we're saying, yes, we're open to hearing, we are listening with our feelings as well as our ears. And it's not just In a group session, it's not just what I say or what you, it is what I say, it's what you think, it's what you say, it's what you say. The truth is true. Let's be open to hearing that and letting that wisdom heal us. I ask to be a channel of love and of blessing. That's a very powerful statement to make, just even to start your day. I ask to be a channel of love and of blessing. I'm showing up. I'm showing up. And the thank you, the gratitude. We stand believing. So it's not just, okay, I can say this and be here in this moment and then turn around and do anything, or I can stand rooted in this. And this is what I am living from. This is what I be living, believing. This is what I'm believing. This is where I'm rooted. Okay? And then always ending with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you, Father, Mother, God. So I'll say that all real close together. Let's relax together and let's feel the presence of a living, loving God. In this moment of time, we ask to lift beyond earth and into areas of absolute truth. We ask that the things most needed by these souls in this time will be spoken. I ask to be a channel of love and of blessing. We stand believing. Thank you, Mother, Father, God. You can feel the power of that. To me, it encompasses it all in a very brief thing. And she would go right into her attunement at that point, and the room had already elevated to equal what she had to say. The thing that struck me so much about the teachings of her and her guidance, it was always a message of I'm okay. And it was compassion for anything that felt otherwise. If you were in pain, if you were struggling, if you had been through things, it was always the compassion that God is love. One of the things that she came through with was these 3 keys, and they're called for overcoming fear, but also for forgiveness, equally applicable. And the 3 keys were, God is perfect, mankind is perfect, and I am perfect. Hard to take that in. I think we get the God is perfect part pretty well. The mankind is perfect, often she would have to add the caveat, by nature, not yet by expression. And the same with us. It is our nature that we are perfect. We are perfect, spiritual, and divine, as you've heard that affirmation before. And the way that this was applied is if you like to journal, you could sit down and go, okay, I really am upset with my boss, and I need to understand why I am so upset. So you could sit down and go, do I believe God is perfect? Yeah. Do I believe mankind is perfect? Not right now. And so you could journal about, okay, where is this guy? And so this comes to another very big point that she would always bring up, and that is motive. Okay, and this is where I think we get askew a lot of times on the difference between how we are perfect and how we're expressing as perfect. Because if you look at the motive, most of the time, it comes from a place of wanting to feel love or wanting to be in charge. I need to be the boss here. I'm using the boss as the example, right? I have to exert my authority, this kind of thing. Well, where is that coming from? Somehow that person is not believing that they really have that, so they have to create some facade or act it out instead of just being a good leader, right? So they are either, if they don't feel they already own that, well then maybe they're going to act like they think a leader is supposed to act. And we create these big illusions out of this place of trying to do our job right, or I have to answer to so-and-so and blah, blah, blah. So you see where that could go, where you take the motive, and if I say, wow, they're just trying to be good at this, or they're upset because da-da-da, or whatever, it doesn't mean it's okay for them to mistreat you. That is not what I'm saying. But I am saying if you understand the motive, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to take a lot of the sting out of what's going on. And to be able to say, this is a child of God, and he's on another journey, and he's grappling with his power, and what does that really look like? And he hasn't really defined that for himself yet, so he has to blah, 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 blah. Do you see what I'm saying? So motive, motive, motive. It's so important. And then from knowing what the motive is knowing how imperfectly we try on how to play that out. And again, just knowing that we're giving it different, we're just giving it different expressions, okay? And the I am perfect, okay? Wow, that's a hard one. That is such a hard one. And yet, when you put, almost every time I put pen to paper to journal with this, it was never one of the three. It was usually all of the three in some way. Because like, to go back to that example of the boss, well, somehow, if I really believe God is in charge and this is all a divine experience, then somehow I'm going to understand already that what he's playing out is part of that, and it's part of God also. So all I'm saying with the three keys is what I came to is I am one with God. I am one with mankind. And being at one with oneself, not in opposition to oneself, not fighting a battle within oneself. And so if I understand it, to me, all those three could be summed up as the word oneness. Oneness. So where am I missing out on that? And that's where I apply my energy, is in the oneness. Part of what happened for me in my journey as a teacher was I had my mom on a pedestal, and it was like, they always said, her guidance, she was always like, oh, you're going to carry this torch and all. I'm like, well, I can't do what you do, and blah, blah, blah. And like I've said before, I felt like, if Barbara Streisand had a daughter that wanted to be a singer, it's kind of like, really? And so it kind of made me say, I didn't know how to find my voice in all of that. And so I invite you, if there's anyone that you feel that way about, in any regard, if it's an artist, whatever it may be, the turning point for me that really, really helped me was a dear friend of mine that did never know my mother, that I was in book studies and so forth with, Patty Pierce. We sat down together, and I would quote my mom right and left and in all these things, as I used to do. And she would say, but what do you think about that? But what do you think about that? And I realized, no, I can't get up and teach the lesson that my mother taught, but I can tell you what it meant to me. Just like any of us would do with a book we read or an author we read, all I can tell you is my experience anyway. And it shifted everything for me. And I did not feel the responsibility to be her, do what she did. Instead, it was like, my gosh, and I already knew this part, the gift I had to be exposed to that, may I tell you what that feels like to me. And it's about my experience now. It's not about trying to be somebody else. And so I invite you to think about that in your life, anywhere where you might feel lesser than, or you're comparing yourself to anyone. What is your version? You love that because some of that's in you. I loved the way she taught. I loved the way she made people feel, because I wanted to be able to help people understand how great they are, because I can see it in you. It's easy for me to see it in you. So how can I learn to reflect that back? And it is going to look differently from what she did. And that's perfect. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to find the Deborah version of that. So whatever that is, in whatever way you may be comparing yourself, how can you say, what does my highest self say about this? How do I show up in my highest being that thing that I love, or that I think I have to share, or how I can make a difference? So I wanted to show you this lovely picture. There were so many synchronicities in my mother's life, and it sort of felt like, I also felt like we kind of had like my mom was Samantha or something, and we had to keep this, because she was just so amazing. There were always magical things happening around her. I brought this little photo, which I'll let you guys see afterwards, and this is her with my Aunt Helen. And I was telling Stefan this story earlier, so it was just kind of fun, just one of those little magic stories. The two of them were spiritual partners. When they met, it was just like, you know how you just connect with someone. So they would pray and meditate together. They started a center together. They just did everything. They explored. And then they started helping each other. They just enjoyed each other's company so much, and it lifted so much. They started helping each other with their chores, just to spend time around each other and make more time to do their spiritual work together. And so one day, they had been doing this, they'd been together like 10 years as best buds. And everybody would always comment on the fact that they looked alike, and they'd run into, they'd go into a store or something, and they'd think that they were either sisters, or that my Aunt Helen was her mom, or whatever. Anyway, one day they're at Aunt Helen's house, and they're up in the attic, and they're going through things, and my mom opens the thing that's got a photo album, and she goes, "Helen, what? Why do you have a picture of my grandfather?" So there's 6 sons in this picture. One of the sons was my mother's grandfather, and one was my Aunt Helen's grandfather. So they were related, and they never knew it. Aunt Helen grew up in Iowa. My mother grew up in Florida, and they met in Staten Island, New York. And their grandfathers were brothers. I mean, this kind of stuff, and this was not unusual, I'm telling you, stuff like this happened around her all the time. So it's just amazing little things like that all the time. And Aunt Helen, I think, gave my mother courage, because Aunt Helen was that one that knew how to connect things. And let's start that. Let's start that center. My mom would have done that on her own. She created a safe and sacred place for Mom to show up and do her work. They were a perfect pairing, and to know that God's hand is in that, there's no question. There's no question, and it goes on and on how they inspired people and how they brought people together and how they were able to just foster so much positivity in the world. It's just pretty crazy. So one of the things I wanted to say, I don't usually use a lot of notes, but I wanted to be sure to read you a couple of things, just so you could feel, there's no way that I could sum up all of her teachings. But I can tell you inklings of how she impacted my life. And one of the things was, I was just listening to this recording of her inspired teaching on the word integrity. It was very powerful. I'd love to share it with y'all sometime. Just wonderful stuff. Things that we know about integrity, things we know, I never thought of it that way before. Practical ways to apply that in your life, ways to challenge yourself to be of more integrity, even though we're all good people. But how much more? What else would we do spiritually to be in integrity? So we had done this, and I just listened to this tape, and this is back from 1992, I believe, is when we did it. And after she finished the message, there were several of us in the room. She had us go around the room. This is another talent my mother had. It was never, "Oh, that was interesting." It was, "And how are you going to use that?" It was always the next step of, it doesn't mean anything until we put feet to it. It just doesn't mean anything until we feel it and we own it. And so she had us go around the room and say, when I go, if there is such a thing as a life review, it's not how would I like to have been known, because it really isn't about how other people perceived us. Hopefully we have those ripples and we bless people. I'm not discounting that. But the question was, how would you like to be able to look back and think of yourself? Like, what would you like to be able to say about yourself when you had passed? I thought it was a very intriguing question. And so I transcribed what I said because it resonated with where I am right now in my life so much, and this was my answer. So again, this is me interpreting gifts from her, right? How did I use that? So I said, I don't trust myself on a lot of things, but one thing I do trust is my own motives. I know my motives are right, but I get frustrated because I'm rather simplistic in that I think that if you mean well, it should come out well, and you should be able to do it well, and people should accept it as such. But my follow-through isn't always there, or their understanding isn't always there. So that's where the challenges come in my world, and then I get discouraged and I lose my integrity by not standing in what I have felt or know is true. And I went on, I was reading a book recently, and this phrase came up that I just love. A person was advising someone to wallow in their talents. And I love that, and it hit me between the eyes, and I said, that's what I guess that I would like to know myself for, is that I wallow in the goodness. I wallow in the joy, because I know I have good ideas. I know I can come up with good concepts, and I'm creative and have talents, but I don't stay focused there. And just that word of wallowing, being in the middle of that, and letting that be what surrounds you and what you really fill yourself with. If that's really where you're coming from all the time, at that point, what would your actions look like? And we know from wallowing in our grief and our upset that people can't get us out of it, no matter how hard they try. So I'd like to wallow in joy and wallow in goodness to the point that no one else can get me out of it, including me. So I think that's what I got from my mom so much, was just this sense that anything is possible. Like I said, there was just this air of magic around her, because she would be the first one to tell on herself for all the mistakes she made. That was one of the reasons she held back when she had opportunities to be famous, was she was uncomfortable with people looking into her background and all that, because she could reconcile it, but she knew that at that time, at least, the climate was like, you had to be perfect if you were a spiritual teacher, right? If you were on a pulpit, they expected you to never have any marks on your card. And I think anyone that's lived that way, where is their compassion going to come from? I think that when we make mistakes, we are afforded even the understanding of where that compassion needs to come from. So, she wrote a book that she did not get published. She published small things. She would publish little, meditations or this, that, and the other. But she didn't want to get out there in a great big old way. She taught around the country. She taught these intensives, and she would go to places and do these things. But there was a reservation about saying, hey, world, because she wanted to keep her private life private. But she did write this book called A Soul Becoming. It was not published, but I like to lift little pieces from it. And this was part of, at the end of her book, this benediction that I would like to read to you. Again, just to get the essence of it. This was at the end. This is what I believe as of this date. This is where my thoughts are. This is what I'm feeling this warm February day. Will I feel different in March or July or December? Hopefully. I am growing and thinking and feeling and knowing always a higher truth. And I want you to take these words to heart, because if she was here, and I believe she's here, she would want you to hear this with your being directly from her. Join me in believing in you, in loving you for your courage and your great power to seek always, and to not be afraid to try on a new idea. You have the courage, when you find a new truth, to be the one to introduce it. Don't be afraid to tell your truths through your actions, your works, and your attitudes. You must live the life, not just say the words. A thing is not our own until we have lived it. Our purpose is to live life. And we can do this. We wouldn't have come to earth if we couldn't live our life and be fulfilled spiritually. Walk with me in the belief in God, heavenly love for all, and complete friendship between us, children of God. Walk with me into a world of love and compassion. I believe that God is all there is, and we are part of God. I am a soul becoming. What I will become, I do not know. But I will know someday when the fear becomes less and the love greater. Thank you for walking with me. So, time being what it is, I'm going to segue right into our meditation, which I'm also going to lift from, this is the meditation that was part of what came through at the end of the integrity tape. So this is from her. And it starts with close your eyes. And let us look for a moment at a world that has integrity, where you say hello to someone and they answer from their heart. They truly greet you because you have value. They honor the wisdom of your speaking. They know you will not speak anything because you're angry or frightened, that you speak from a true desire to serve, so they can hear it with their love ears. So you walk through your world, and you go to your labor, and you give your day's labor. You do your work as perfectly as you can, knowing that even in the errors, you are in integrity because you are doing it to the best of your ability. And by your example, again, you create an atmosphere of labor where there is joy in it. And if you are not in your joy job, then it would be very difficult to be in integrity because you would resent each moment of your labor. In the home place, you will speak not to control, not to have others obey you, but you will speak from what is the true need and the true desire to give. So you will speak always from, this is my belief, this is how I believe it can be. And suddenly, you see you are wrapped in a golden bubble, that you are in this magnificence. And everything you look at, you see through the golden light of the God that surrounds you. And looking through this, you begin to see in every face the desire for happiness. In every face, the desire to be valued, to have purpose. You begin to see that everything you do, done with your heart, is complete. And you see that out of this belief, you begin to look at your leaders and you say, how am I like this? And if I am not like this, how may I make it different? How may I make my voice not one of being against, but of being for something? If I see the error in them, then surely I can see it in me. And not to wrestle with the error in me, but to pour in the opposite till it washes out and I stand clear. From a golden bubble, the world is golden. It is filled with light and energy and the attunement with God. Standing, looking through your bubble, you see the world needs love. Who shall provide it if you do not? The world needs to understand each other. Who will understand if you do not help them? If you are not the one who came to earth to serve, who did come for that? And how do you support them? If it is you that has come to do this, then do this. Rise up, giants. The world is waiting. It is in your hands, your loving hands. It is done. So let's take that deep into our hearts. The belief in our magnificence. The belief that anything else we've been experiencing, be it a rough road or the joyful, is all a part of life. That we are doing it perfectly, even if we don't think we are. That all of this comes to the better understanding of our oneness. That's the answer. That's the result. We are one. We are one with everything that means. We have all the love that we need. So filled to overflowing that we reach out and find new ways to bless. Filled with inspiration and joy and the knowledge of how to plug in as our highest self. So guided, trusting that inner voice, refining that connection to where that voice is the one that takes forefront at all times. That's the practice. That the voice that empowers and blesses and heals, that's the highest self, seeking expression through your conscious awareness. To feeling that core, feeling that golden light and that golden bubble, let's expand that bubble so that we feel we are encompassing everyone in this room. And we've created a sacred space where we can each bring those ones that we would like to pray for in this time. And you can say their name out loud or hold them in your heart. And all of us hold each other's people and concerns in this energy of healing